Good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us. We'll begin with chapter 14, verse 30. Chapter 14, verse 30. The Jewish people have crossed the sea. The Egyptians have drowned in the sea. Vayosha Hashem bayomahu es Yisrael mi'ad Mitzrayim. On that day, God saved the Jewish people from Egypt. Vayar Yisrael Mitzrayim meis al sfas hayam. And the Jews saw the Egyptians dead on the edge of the sea. It's just an interesting thing to think about. What do you mean on that day God saved the Jews? God saved the Jews already. He took them out of Egypt. So I'm sure many of you would imagine what the Sforno will say, but let's just see it. Sforno on Pasuk Lamed, Vayosha Hashem bayomahu es Yisrael. B'misas hamistolim bam l'shabdam nisharu hem b'nei chorin. Says the Sforno, now they're free. Ki ades mosam ha-Yisrael kavarim borchim. Until the Egyptians died, the Jews were like slaves fleeing. And yes, they're out of slavery, but if their masters catch up to them and apprehend them, then they're back in slavery. But now that their masters are dead, now they're really free. And it's so relevant, the end of this pasuk, that the Jewish people saw the Egyptians dead. It's not just that the Egyptians died. The Jewish people didn't have to worry anymore. And they knew they didn't have to worry anymore. Just something to think about. Okay. Skipping ahead, chapter 16. We're not going to go through the Az Yashir. It's complicated. Chapter 16, verse 4. Jewish people are now in the desert. Vayomer Hashem el Moshe. Hashem said to Moshe, Hineni mamtir lachem lechem min hashamayim. Behold, I'm going to bring you bread from heaven. V'yatzah ha'am v'laktu dvaryom b'yomo. The people will come out to harvest it, to gather it from the field every day. Why? Laman anasenu, so that I, God, can test the people. Hayelech b'sorasi imlo. Will they observe my Torah or not? Okay, I get that God is offering them man. I get that the way they're going to get the man is they're going to have to come out and collect it daily. What's that last phrase? So that I can test them, will they keep my Torah? And if God wouldn't bring them man, he can't test them. It's if you have man, you can expect them to keep the Torah. If not. What are we talking about? Second Rashi on Pasuk Daled. L'man anasenu hayelech b'sorosi. Im yishmeru mitzvos hatzluyos bo. Will they observe the commandments connected to the man? Shelo yosiru mimenu. V'lo yetzu b'shabas lukot. They're not supposed to leave any over from the man from one day to the next. They're not supposed to collect the man on Shabbos. There are rules. So this is the test set. I'm going to start giving them man, and let's see if they keep the rules. There's a very interesting kliyakar on this Rashi, kliyakar on Pasuk Daled. L'man anasenu hayelech b'sorosim lo. Piresh Rashi, im yishmeru mitzvos hatzluyos bo shelo yosiru menu v'lo yetzu b'shabas lokot. So he starts off by quoting Rashi, and then he says, V'chol ze nemar al midas habitachon. This issue about how they're going to relate to the man is all about bitachon. It's all about faith in God. Ki im lo yosiru mimenu zehu mofes shem shleimim b'midas habitachon. If they make sure not to save any from one day to the next, that is a sign that they are really living a life of real faith in God. Because a person who has bread in the cabinet and says, but what am I going to eat tomorrow? So that's a lack of faith. But the point is, what he's saying is that, do they believe that God is going to bring them man tomorrow? Brought them man today. God says, don't leave any over. Do they believe that there'll be man tomorrow? So it's more than, are they obedient or they're not obedient? Says the Kliyakar, this specific thing of man, which is so basic to people, food to eat, this specific thing of man and the mitzvos associated with it are all about, are they ready to live a life of faith in God? Yaspik lahem gam liyom hamacharas. Takes betachon also. God sends a double portion on Friday, but is that going to cover them for Shabbos? Is that really going to be enough? God says, don't come out to check on Shabbos. Yeah, well, maybe it won't be enough. If they can keep the rules associated with the man, which is all about faith in God, then I can be confident that they'll go in the ways of my Torah. If a person's always anxious about what's going to be with this, what's going to be with that, how am I going to pay for this, how am I going to pay for that, then they won't be able to live God's Torah. They won't be able to have time to study God's Torah because they're always going to be worried. Okay. He says, and that's the way of our world, that people spend so much time focusing on covering their needs, which of course is our responsibility to cover our needs, but people probably spend more time than necessary covering their needs, and they don't have time to study Torah. So that's the Kli Yakar's pshat on what Rashi is saying. Sforno on Pasuk Dalet. It is the second Sforno on Pasuk Dalet. Lamana nasenu hayilech b'sorasi, so that I can test them, will they follow my Torah? So just to explain, according to Kli Yakar, the pshat according to Rashi is, if they follow the rules involving the man, that means they can really live with faith. If they can really live with faith, then they can really live with my Torah once I give it to them. Says the Sforno, if they're able to be supported without having to work hard to get their food, then I can see that's a fair test. Can they keep the Torah or not? Obviously, they haven't been given the Torah yet, but the point is, this is going to be the framework that they move on with. Because it's always hard, if a person's under tremendous duress and tremendous pressure, it could be they don't do as well as they'd like to do, but that doesn't mean that they wouldn't do better if things were more taken care of. So everything's going to be taken care of. And now all they have to do is just keep my Torah. That's how the Sforno explains it. There's a medrash that the Torah was given to the people who ate the man. And there's a reason why the Torah was given to the people who ate the man. So you can understand that medrash in different ways. But the Sforno was saying that's the point. That really God had every right to expect perfect fulfillment of the commandments of the Torah because he was taking care of all their needs. Okay. Let's move on to verse 15. So we talk about when the man first came down. Vayeru v'nei Yisrael, the Jewish people saw, Vayomru ishalachiv manhu. And this one said to his brother, Manhu is frequently translated as, what is it? Rashi explains Manhu means it's a means of preparing food. Ki lo yadu mahu. They didn't know what it was. So whether they asked, what is it? But they say it's something to use for food. Vayomer Moshe lehem, and Moshe said to them, Hu halechem asher nasan Hashem lachem lo'achla. Moshe said, that's the bread that God gave you to eat. So what an interesting thing. So man's a big deal. And I mean, the pasuk is saying that we call it man because that's the first word that popped into people's mouths when they had no idea what in the world this was. It doesn't seem like the most, could you imagine you meet a child, somewhat of a unique name, and you ask the parents, so why'd you name the child? They said, we don't know. Child was born, we didn't know what to say. So this was just, I don't know, so the man is so special. God plans this all out. How about you just tell Moshe to tell them what to call it? So really interesting Orach Chaim over here. Orach Chaim pasuk tesvav vayomru ishman. Tzarich ladas ma kavanas hakasuf bazeh. You have to understand, what is the intent of this pasuk? V'ulai ki birosamoso hizmin Hashem lefiem b'makom sheyomru mahu amru manhu. Maybe the pshat is that God made them say man. They wanted to say, what is this? Ma. But instead, God stuck in their mouths that they said man, not ma, but man. V'zeh shmo asher kava lo Hashem. That's the name that God designated. V'sam shmo b'fi Yisrael. And he put the name of it in Jewish people's mouths. Interesting thing to think about. Okay, let's now go on to verse 18. Vayamodu va'omer v'lo ha'adif ha'marbeh v'hamamit lo ha'chsir ish lefi achlo lokatu. Every person, when they went to get the man, the person who took a lot of man home with him didn't get any more. The person who took a small amount home didn't get any less. Everyone got what they were supposed to get, regardless of how much they physically took out in the field. In other words, when they came home and they measured it, it was the exact right amount. Okay, Kli Yakar on Pasuk Yud Ches. V'lo adif ha'marbeh v'hamamit lo hechsir. V'akeda kasav v'cheda barbanel kasav, which is a mofes al shakom zonosav shel adam ktsuvim lo lichtei chayev. This experience of the Jewish people in the desert with the man was, of course, God's way of taking care of them in the desert. But this is supposed to be lessons for generations of the Jewish people long after the man stops falling from the sky. And this is supposed to be a perspective on how to view our food that we get in life, or to look at it a little bit more broadly, our financial support. And the idea is that the mashal of the man always being the exact right amount is that a person's financial support, food, is set for what they need. Imagine a person who earns much more money than they need. They don't take it with him. Like the famous pasuk in Tehillim, that when a person is wealthy, when they die, they're not going to take it along with them. And a person who never was able to get that second car, or never able to get the house they wanted, or whatever, etc., really isn't losing out. Because God gave the person what they needed. The famous idea that whatever was left over would just be consumed by worms, right? But everybody got exactly what they needed. So if our goal in life is to have things for down the road, obviously we have to be financially, fiscally responsible, and we need to put money away, and we need to have retirement plans, and we need to have long-term retirement plans, all those things. Of course, that's true. But his point is, for the basic idea of collecting money for the sake of collecting money, if a person didn't eat all of their money, it was going to go to waste because they weren't going to benefit from it. Money, if a person doesn't use all their money in this lifetime, it's gone. And whatever a person doesn't use from their assets, go to others. Okay, a very interesting, just a very interesting kliyaka to think about. And that he says that's the mashal of the man. That the intricacies of it are to teach all of us that God, again, we have to work for by the way, even the man, that to go out to the fields and get it. We have to work, but when we work, as long as we're putting in the appropriate ishtadlus, God gets us what we need. So it's a very interesting thing to think about. We discussed the Sforno this morning on what it means that God saved the Jews on that day. We discussed Rashi and the Kliyakot Sforno regarding what does it mean that the man will allow God to test the Jewish people. We discussed Orach Chaim regarding what's the significance of, they called it man if they didn't even know what to call it. And we discussed the Kliyaka regarding the symbolism of the man.